My name is Zelda Fight, and 3 months ago, I watched my supervisor obliterate what she assumed was nothing more than spreadsheets and meeting notes. She stood behind my desk, announced to our entire department that my year of effort was worthless trash, then pressed delete while 23 people watched. What she actually wiped out was the unseen backbone holding our company together. And when my phone buzzed 30 seconds later with a $500,000 job offer, I realized she had just handed me the ultimate tool for the most satisfying destruction I could ever imagine. Before I tell you exactly how seeing her panic became the sweetest moment of my professional life, could you take a few seconds to hit that like button and subscribe? Because what I'm about to share will show you how a single act of cruelty can boomerang in ways that seem impossible, until it happens right before your eyes. And trust me, you need to hear every detail of how this played out. Let me take you back to where it all began, because revenge stories always start long before the actual revenge arrives. 18 months ago, I joined Peton Analytics as a client relationship coordinator. The job description made it sound dull. Maintain communication records, schedule follow-ups, track client satisfaction metrics. What they didn't say was that our company was losing accounts faster than anyone wanted to admit, and the person before me had lasted exactly 4 months before quitting without notice. My supervisor, Quinn Brexworth, made it clear from day one that she saw my role as pointless overhead. She was one of those people who thought business relationships were purely transactional. Send invoices, deliver services, collect payments, repeat. The idea that clients might actually want real human connection was foreign to her rigid, systematic approach. But I noticed something different in those first few weeks. When I reviewed our client files, I found page after page of dull communication logs that read like robot scripts. No personality, no warmth, no sign that anyone at our company had ever cared to learn anything personal about the people sending us thousands of dollars every month. So I started doing something that felt radical in that environment. I began treating our clients like actual human beings. When Vernon Hutchcraft, who ran a mid-sized manufacturing company, mentioned during a routine check-in call that his golden retriever had been diagnosed with hip issues, I made a note. 2 weeks later, I checked in to see how the treatment was going. He was shocked that someone remembered. He spent 20 minutes telling me about his weekend trip to find a specialist vet. When Constance Farweather celebrated her textile company's 15th anniversary, I sent a personalized message recognizing the milestone and asking about her plans for growth. She ended up scheduling an extra consultation session that brought in $12,000 of unexpected revenue. These weren't extravagant gestures or costly gifts. I simply listened when people shared pieces of their lives, remembered what mattered to them, and followed up in ways that showed I genuinely cared about their success beyond what they paid us. Quinn never grasped what I was doing. She would pass by my workstation and see me typing what looked like casual conversation notes, and I could feel her disapproval radiating across the office. During our monthly reviews, she would flip through my activity reports with visible irritation. "Why are you spending 45 minutes on calls that should take 15?" she would ask, tapping her pen against her clipboard. "Efficiency metrics show you're processing fewer interactions per hour than optimal." I tried explaining that longer conversations were building stronger relationships, that clients specifically requested to work with me on new projects, that our retention rate had improved by 37% since I started personalizing our approach. But Quinla only cared about numbers that fit her spreadsheet formulas. What she didn't realize was that I was creating something far more valuable than efficient call logs. I was becoming the bridge between our company and the people who kept us alive. Roderick Yates, who owned a chain of specialty bookstores, started calling me directly when he needed anything instead of going through our main line. He told me he appreciated talking to someone who remembered he was passionate about vintage mystery novels, and that his daughter was studying literature at university. Tempest Living Well, whose catering business accounted for our third largest monthly revenue, began recommending our services to other companies specifically because she enjoyed our conversations about her weekend farmers market visits and her grandmother's recipe collection. Month after month, I watched our client satisfaction scores rise while Quinla stayed fixated on efficiency metrics that completely missed the point. She measured how quickly we could handle interactions while I was building the loyalty that determined whether those interactions would even continue. The breaking point came during our annual strategic planning meeting. Our CEO, Gideon Ashworth, was reviewing department performance when he noted that client retention had reached an all-time high. He specifically praised our relationship management approach and suggested expanding the personal touch strategy to other departments. I watched Quinla's expression shift as the credit for improved retention landed on what she considered my inefficient methods. After the meeting ended, she cornered me near the supply room. "I don't know what kind of performance theater you're running," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "but this company succeeds on professional excellence, not social hour conversations with clients." She assigned me to complete a comprehensive audit of all client interactions over the past year, demanding detailed documentation of every communication, every follow-up note, every relationship-building effort I had made. It was clearly meant as punishment. Hundreds of hours of bureaucratic busy work designed to pull me away from the real relationship building that was driving our success. But I approached the audit project with the same meticulous attention to personal detail that I applied to client work. I created detailed records showing not just which communications had occurred, but how those interactions had translated into business outcomes. I documented the catering referrals Tempest had generated, the expanded services Vernon had purchased after we discussed his company's growth plans. The contract renewal Brick had signed early because he trusted our partnership. The completed audit was 53 pages of evidence that personal attention to client relationships was directly responsible for over $200,000 in additional revenue. Every casual conversation about weekend plans or family celebrations had strengthened business ties that competitors couldn't replicate with their generic transactional approach. I was proud of that audit. It represented not just a year of work, but a year of genuine connections that had transformed how our company related to the people who trusted us with their business, which made what happened next even more crushing. Quinla called an all-hands department meeting on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. She announced we needed to review our client relationship protocols and that my audit would serve as a case study for discussion. I assumed she was finally ready to acknowledge that personal attention was driving our improved performance. Instead, she directed me to display my audit files on the main conference room screen while the entire department watched. Then she began dissecting every personal note, every conversation detail, every relationship-building effort as evidence of unprofessional boundary violations. "This is exactly the kind of inefficiency that undermines our service standards," she declared, scrolling through months of careful documentation. Personal chit-chat about pets and hobbies has no place in business communications. These files represent a complete failure to maintain appropriate professional distance. I felt heat creeping up my neck as 23. Co-workers watched her tear apart work that had generated significant revenue for our company. She was presenting my greatest professional accomplishment as a cautionary tale of what not to do. But then she did something that crossed a line I never expected. She pulled up the file containing my complete audit database, every client note, every relationship detail, every conversation record that proved how personal attention was driving our business success. Her finger moved toward the delete option while she continued lecturing about professional standards. "This entire approach is garbage," she announced, her hand hovering over the deletion command. "Beginning today, we return to efficient professional client communication protocols." And then she clicked delete. I watched a year of relationship building vanish from the screen. 53 pages of documented connections that had generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue, gone in a single vindictive moment. The conference room fell into absolute silence as everyone absorbed what had just happened. Quinla turned away from the screen with a satisfied expression, clearly expecting me to accept this humiliation and start rebuilding my work according to her preferred methods. But she had made one critical miscalculation. While she was erasing my documentation, she hadn't wiped out the actual relationships I had built. The clients who trusted me, who called me directly, who had shared personal details about their lives and businesses. Those connections lived in their hearts and memories, not in our computer files. And apparently, some of those connections had been noticing our company dynamics more closely than anyone expected. My phone began buzzing before Kina had finished explaining her new efficiency protocols. The caller ID showed Marlowe Partners, a consulting firm that had recently formed when 3 former colleagues left to start their own company. I stepped out of the conference room to take the call, my hands still trembling from watching my work vanish in front of everyone. "Zelda," said the voice on the other end. "We've been watching what's happening at Peton, and we want to talk." The conversation that followed would change everything. Marlowe Partners had been tracking our client retention gains, and they knew exactly who was responsible for the relationships keeping major accounts satisfied. They had been planning to approach me for months, but seeing Queena destroy my audit files convinced them the timing was perfect. "We're prepared to offer you $500,000 a year to join our team," they said, "plus equity participation and full autonomy over client relationship strategies. We believe personal attention is the future of consulting, and we want you to build that future with us. $500,000 and more than double my current compensation. Working for people who valued exactly what Kina dismissed as worthless, inefficiency. But the most beautiful part of their offer wasn't the money. We know you can't bring proprietary information from Peton," they continued. "But we also know that client relationships are built on trust and personal connection, not on database files. If you choose to join us and if clients choose to work with someone they trust, rather than staying with someone who treats them like transaction numbers, that is simply the natural consequence of different business philosophies." I understood immediately what they were implying. They weren't asking me to steal clients or break any legal agreements. They were simply pointing out that if I left Peton and clients decided they preferred working with someone who remembered their dog's health issues and their daughter's college plans, that was their choice to make. When I walked back into the conference room, Queena was still lecturing about professional efficiency standards while my former coworkers stared at their hands or notebooks, clearly uneasy about what they had witnessed. She noticed I had returned and paused her presentation. "Do you have questions about our new communication protocols?" she asked. I looked around the room at people I had worked with for 18 months, then at the blank screen where my audit had been displayed before being deleted, then back at Queena's expectant face. "Actually," I said, "I have something to announce." What happened next would become the most satisfying moment of my professional life. But I want to save that for the next part of this story because the revenge that followed was so perfectly orchestrated by Queena herself that you need to hear exactly how her own actions set off the dominoes that brought down everything she thought she was protecting. The beauty of what unfolded wasn't that I hatched an elaborate scheme to hurt her or the company. The beauty was that by deleting my relationship-building work, she had just removed the only thing keeping our biggest clients from walking away. She thought she was erasing inefficient documentation. What she had actually erased was the foundation of customer loyalty that took a year to build and could vanish in a matter of weeks. And when my phone rang with that $500,000 offer, I realized she had just handed me the key to the most elegant revenge possible, simply letting natural consequences play out while she watched everything she believed she controlled slip away forever. "I'm resigning from Peton Analytics effective immediately," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "I'll be joining Marlowe Partners as their Director of Client Relations." The conference room fell completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming in the background and someone's pen clicking nervously against their notepad. Quinla's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to something that almost looked like panic. "You can't just quit in the middle of a department meeting," she stammered, clearly blindsided by this unexpected turn. "There are protocols, notice requirements, transition procedures." "Actually," I replied, pulling out my phone to show the contract offer I had just received. "My employment agreement allows for immediate resignation in cases of hostile work environment or professional misconduct. Having my work deleted in front of colleagues while being publicly humiliated qualifies on both counts." Gideon Ashworth, who had been quietly observing from the back, stepped forward. Perhaps we should discuss this privately before making any hasty decisions. But I was done with private discussions and diplomatic solutions. Quinla had chosen to humiliate me publicly, so she would get to experience the consequences just as publicly. There's nothing to discuss, I said, gathering my personal items from the conference table. My decision is final. I'll submit formal resignation paperwork within the hour. As I walked toward the exit, I could feel 23 pairs of eyes on me. Some of my coworkers looked shocked, others impressed, and a few seemed to be reconsidering their own career choices. Quinla called after me, her voice higher than usual. You're making a huge mistake. Marlowe Partners is a startup with no proven track record. You're throwing away job security for some fantasy about relationship building being more important than professional standards. I paused at the doorway and turned back. We'll see which approach proves more valuable. Within 24 hours, I had cleared out my desk, completed exit interviews, and started my new position at Marlowe Partners. Their office was smaller than Peaton's, but filled with energy and excitement about building something innovative in the consulting space. More importantly, I was finally working with people who understood that business relationships were built on genuine human connection, not efficiency metrics and standardized protocols. But the real validation came in the weeks that followed as I watched the natural consequences of Quinla's actions unfold with devastating precision. I hadn't contacted any Peaton clients. I hadn't made sales calls or sent recruitment messages. I simply updated my professional profiles to reflect my new role and continued, being the same person who had spent a year building authentic relationships with people who needed consulting services. The first call came on Thursday morning, 3 days after I started. Vernon Hutchcraft, the manufacturing company owner whose golden retriever I had checked in on during routine calls, dialed my new office directly. Zelda, he said, I heard through the professional network that you've moved to a new firm. I wanted to congratulate you and ask about your company's capabilities. We talked for an hour about his business needs, expansion plans, and yes, his dog's improved mobility after the specialist treatment. By the end, he had scheduled a consultation to transition his account to Marlowe Partners. The second call came that same afternoon. Constance Farweather, whose textile company anniversary I had celebrated, wanted to discuss her upcoming project needs with someone who truly understood her business philosophy. I've been working with consulting firms for 12 years, she told me. And you're the first person who ever made me feel like my company mattered beyond the invoice amount. If you offer the same personal attention at your new firm, I'm interested in making a change. By the end of my first week, I had received calls from 6 former Peaton clients, not because I solicited them, but because they preferred working with someone who treated them as individuals rather than account numbers. Meanwhile, back at Peaton Analytics, Quinla was beginning to realize what she had actually erased when she destroyed my relationship-building documentation. I heard about her growing panic through mutual contacts in the professional community. Apparently, she had tried contacting major clients for routine check-ins, only to discover that many were no longer interested in continuing their contracts. When she called Vernon Hutchcraft to schedule his quarterly review, he politely informed her that he was exploring other consulting options and would not be renewing his agreement. When she reached out to Constance Farweather about upcoming projects, Constance explained that she had found a consulting partner who truly understood her business values. One by one, the clients I had spent a year cultivating were choosing to work with someone who remembered their personal details, business challenges, and individual communication preferences. Quinla had believed that client loyalty was tied to Peaton's brand reputation and service quality. She was discovering that client loyalty was actually tied to the personal connections that made people feel valued and understood. The third week after my departure, I received a call that made everything clear about how devastating Quinla's decision had become. Rick Yates, the bookstore owner who had started calling me directly instead of going through Peaton's main number, wanted to share information he thought I should know. Quinla called me yesterday, he said, asking if there were any service issues that might explain why I was considering other consulting options. When I told her I was following you to Marlowe Partners because I valued our personal connection, she actually argued with me about it. He laughed, but not in a way that suggested amusement. She told me professional relationships should be based on service quality, not personal chit-chat about books and family. She said I was making an emotional decision instead of a business decision. Can you believe that? That phone call revealed everything about why Quinla's approach was failing so spectacularly. Even when confronted with evidence that personal relationships were driving client decisions, she couldn't adjust her philosophy. She was still trying to convince people that efficiency metrics mattered more than feeling valued and understood. By the end of my first month at Marlowe Partners, 14 former Peton clients had either switched to our firm or started conversations about potential transitions. These weren't small accounts. They represented over 60% of Peton's annual revenue. I wasn't actively recruiting them. I was simply being available when they called, remembering details about their lives and businesses, and providing the same personal attention that had built our relationships in the first place. Marlowe Partners was thriving beyond their most optimistic projections, while Peton Analytics was experiencing the worst client retention crisis in company history. The most satisfying part wasn't the money or professional success, though both were incredible. The most satisfying part was knowing that Quinla had created this entire situation herself, through her stubborn refusal to value what clients actually wanted. She could have supported my relationship-building approach. She could have learned from improved retention rates and client satisfaction scores. She could have recognized that personal attention was generating measurable business results. Instead, she chose to publicly humiliate me and delete work that represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in client loyalty, apparently believing her efficiency-focused philosophy was more important than actual evidence of what worked. 2 months after my departure, I heard through professional networks that Gideon Ashworth had called an emergency board meeting to address the client retention crisis. Peton Analytics was facing potential layoffs, reduced operations, and even the possibility of selling to a larger firm to survive the revenue loss. Quinla, who had been so confident in her professional standards and efficiency metrics, was now scrambling to explain how the company had lost most of its major accounts within 8 weeks. According to sources still working there, she initially tried to blame my departure for the client defections, claiming I had somehow poisoned client relationships or violated ethical standards to steal accounts. But the timeline didn't support her accusations. Clients weren't leaving immediately after I resigned. They left after attempting to maintain relationships under Quinla's new efficiency-focused approach and realizing they preferred working with people who treated them as individuals. The board investigation revealed exactly what I could have told them months earlier. Clients choose consulting partners based on trust, quality of communication, and feeling valued, not on how quickly their calls are processed or how efficiently their concerns are categorized. Quinla had spent a year dismissing relationship building as inefficient social hour conversation, and now she was facing the consequences of that philosophy, in the form of client defections threatening the company's very survival. 3 months after my departure, I received the call that made this revenge story complete. Gideon Ashworth contacted me personally to discuss what he called a potential partnership opportunity. He wanted to know if Marlowe Partners would be interested in acquiring Peton Analytics' remaining client accounts and possibly hiring some of their staff during what he described as a strategic restructuring process. The key is a company that had considered my relationship-building approach inefficient. Garbage was now hoping to sell their remaining assets to the firm built on exactly the principles Quinla had rejected. During our conversation, Gideon mentioned that they were also reevaluating leadership approaches in their client relations department. Reading between the lines, it was clear that Quinla's position was no longer secure. "I have to ask," he said toward the end of our call. "What would it take to bring you back to Peton as Director of Client Relations? We're prepared to offer significant compensation increases and complete autonomy over relationship management strategies." The irony was incredible. 3 months after watching my work get deleted in front of my colleagues, I was being recruited back to implement the same approach at a much higher salary. with full authority over the department that had rejected my methods. But I had no interest in returning to people who only learned to value my approach after losing millions in revenue. I appreciate the offer, I told him, but I'm very happy with my current position. Marlowe Partners understood the value of personal client relationships from day one, rather than having to learn it through crisis. 6 months after leaving Peyton Analytics, I was promoted to senior partner at Marlowe Partners with equity participation and responsibility for expanding our client relationship philosophy across multiple service lines. The clients who had followed me from Peyton became the foundation for our most successful year in company history. Meanwhile, Peyton Analytics underwent the strategic restructuring Gideon had euphemistically described. They laid off 30% of their staff, sold their largest office space, and ultimately merged with a competitor who valued efficiency metrics over personal relationships. Quinla was not retained during the merger. I learned about her departure through LinkedIn updates and professional network conversations. According to former colleagues, she spent her final months at Peyton trying to rebuild client relationships using the same impersonal approach that had caused the crisis in the first place. She apparently never understood that the problem wasn't her communication skills or technical knowledge. The problem was her fundamental belief that business relationships should be purely transactional. The last update I heard about her situation came from a mutual professional contact, who mentioned that she was struggling to find comparable positions because her most recent role ended during a major client retention crisis. Potential employers were understandably hesitant to hire someone whose management approach had contributed to such massive revenue loss, especially in client-facing roles where relationship building was essential. I felt no pleasure in hearing about her career difficulties. My satisfaction came from knowing that the principles she had mocked and rejected were now recognized across the industry as essential for sustainable business success. Every consulting firm was investing in personal client relationship strategies. Every professional development program emphasized treating clients as individuals rather than transaction sources. Every successful consulting practice prioritized exactly the approach Quinla had considered inefficient garbage. She had been wrong about what clients valued, wrong about what drove business success, and wrong about the importance of personal connections in professional relationships. And her wrongness had been revealed not through elaborate schemes or calculated attacks, but simply by allowing natural consequences to unfold after she chose to publicly destroy work that represented the foundation of customer loyalty. The most elegant revenge is always the kind where your opponent defeats themselves through their own actions, and you simply step aside and let their poor decisions create the destruction they deserve. Today, 2 years after watching my audit files get deleted in front of 23 colleagues, I'm running the client relations division for one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in our region. Our success is built entirely on the principle Quinla rejected. Business relationships thrive when people feel valued, understood, and personally connected to their service providers. Every day I work with clients who appreciate having their birthdays remembered, family updates acknowledged, and business challenges addressed, with genuine personal investment in their success. And every day I'm reminded that the best revenge against people who undervalue your contributions is simply proving them wrong through your continued success elsewhere. Quinla thought she was deleting inefficient documentation when she destroyed my relationship-building work. What she actually deleted was the only thing preventing her professional world from collapsing around her. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is just letting people experience the natural consequences of their own terrible decisions while you build something better somewhere else. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had someone undervalue work you knew was important, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Sometimes the best therapy for professional betrayal is sharing stories with people who understand what it feels like to have your contributions dismissed by those who should know better. And if you enjoyed hearing how deleting my files became the beginning of Quinla's professional downfall, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about workplace revenge that writes itself when you simply let incompetent managers face the consequences of their own poor judgment.